Welcome back. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of your post-op notes and having access to them. And I believe it's important to read over those notes once you are, finish your surgery. Now, I got this because I have a really good friend who had surgery like the year before I did. And she's the one who told me, make sure you get the notes. You want to be able to look back and read over everything that the surgeons, the doctors, the nurses, everybody did while you were in surgery. And I had never heard about it or knew about it. Again, this was my first surgery, so I had no idea, but I'm so glad that she told me this. And I think it's normal procedure for the patient to have access to the post-op notes. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically after your surgery, your surgeon your surgeon, maybe there's a scribe in there as well, but they will write down everything that happened during the surgery. And then you can go back and look at that as part of your medical documentation and see what they did. So that, like, my doctor uses MyChart. I'm sure lots of you all, use MyChart. So after the surgery, I went back and I was looking through all of the notes, and then I read exactly, like, my doctor is super detailed. It was just like pages and pages of what was going on during the surgery. But it also makes sense because my operation took 8 hours. So, it's going to be a lot of stuff that they're writing. So if you had any kind of complications during your surgery, any challenges, if they had to deviate for whatever reason, because that happened to me. Apparently, somewhere in the middle of the surgery, I was bleeding a little bit too much. So they had to kind of pause the surgery, address the bleeding, and then kind of go back to it. So you can look at all of that. You can see who was in the operating room at the time, all of the people. So the nurses, all the different kinds of nurses, all the different surgeons, the anesthesiologist, everybody who was in the room at the time, you have access to that information. And then you have access to your, like, how you responded to anesthesia, just your whole, and then your whole hospital stay, they'll kind of summarize that as well. But I was very interested in reading this. I love learning about surgery and the body and all like that. So for me, it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. If you're a person who gets kind of queasy when it comes to surgery and blood and body parts and stuff, then maybe you wouldn't want to read it, but you would want someone, a trusted friend, family member, something like that. Or if you know somebody that's a close friend or family member who's in the medical field, you would want them to look at your notes. So, like, after my surgery, I sent some of my notes to my friend, because she's also the friend who told me to do this, who had surgery before me, is also in the medical field. I didn't say that. So I sent her my notes, just so she could look at it and, make sure it all looked right. And it did, of course. But, and you as the patient should always have access to that. Like, I could log into my chart whenever I want and pull up anything. And if I have questions about certain things, I can go back to my doctors and my surgeons and ask them, like, oh, I'm looking at this part, and, can you explain this further, or, something like that. So definitely, if you're going into surgery, be aware of your post-op notes. And once you're on the other side, just kind of take a look at them. And it's like I said, it's fascinating to see what they did, because how they explain the surgery to you prior to having it is way less detailed, pretty much, than the actual surgery, of course. And there's a lot of medical terminology. So a lot of the stuff I didn't quite understand, so I'd have to Google, what does this word mean, what does that word mean, but yeah, very, very important. If you want to save it electronically, print it out, but you always want to have those records, because if something happens to you in the future and you need to see, let's say you're in a different area, or you move, something like that, you want to be able to have those post-op notes to be able to show another doctor, let's say, yeah, I had surgery, this is what happened, they couldn't read over it. Or if you just go back to your same surgeon, whatever the case may be, it's very important to keep that documentation. So if you are going into surgery, please be aware of your notes, and also have that conversation with your surgeon prior to surgery. How will I have access to my post-op notes? I guess different hospitals and surgeons and stuff do things differently, but you can just ask them, how am I going to have access to these notes post surgery? And they'll tell you what to do and all like that. And if there's a doctor who is hesitant about giving you the notes, then I would be hesitant about them operating on me, because if I'm trusting my life, if I'm putting my life in your hands, you should have no problem giving me the notes afterwards and telling me what happened. So to me, again, I'm not a medical person, but now that I've been through this process, it would definitely be a red flag if I told a surgeon, yes, afterwards I'd like to see the notes, blah, blah, blah. And if they have any kind of hesitancy, that would be a major red flag to me. So if you have any questions about that maybe I didn't cover, please, write a comment and I'll either respond to it, or if it's like a really in-depth question, I can make another video about it. But yeah, post-op notes, very important.